The media is blasting the attack on a hospital in Ukraine, condemning Russian forces for bombing a civilian target. Here's One America's Pearson Sharp.
The United States has a long, storied history of conducting false flag operations in pursuit of its own political agenda. And whether it's starting a war, invading another country, or finding an excuse to sneak out hundreds of tons of gold bullion from a toppled Libyan dictator, the corrupt corporate media lapdogs will gladly offer up a cover story for any false flag operation Washington needs. The invasion of Iraq for totally fabricated weapons of mass destruction comes to mind. And then, as I personally investigated and exposed, there was the false flag gas attacks in Syria to frame President Bashar al-Assad as a mass murdering tyrant just because he wouldn't give in to U.S. demands. But also, of course, because Washington's terrorist allies from the Islamic State needed a chance to escape. That brings us to today, when it looks like we have the makings of yet another false flag operation. This time in the far-flung land of Ukraine, where Biden and his cronies are desperately trying to cook up more conflict to distract from their monumental failures here in America. Not to mention, cover up their top secret and illegal biolabs developing deadly weapons that the State Department insisted didn't exist, until they came out and admitted a day later that the labs do, in fact, exist. So, what's the most recent story cooked up by the American Pravda? Well, it turns out that the Russians, Democrats' favorite adversary, blew up a hospital, killing several people, including a child. The latest report from the corporate media warhawks is that a maternity ward in Mariupol, Ukraine, was bombed indiscriminately, which has naturally sparked a global outrage.
An aerial bomb on a maternity hospital is the conclusive evidence that what is happening is a genocide of Ukrainians. Europeans, you won't be able to say that you didn't see what happened to Ukrainians in Mariupol. You saw, you know. Consequently, you must strengthen sanctions against Russia so that it never has the chance to continue this genocide.
It's quite the rousing speech from Ukraine's president, and it sounds pretty damning towards Russia. But it would be a lot more convincing if Zelensky didn't have George Soros' hand up his back, moving his mouth. Still, we have to take these accusations seriously, because at the end of the day, we don't know. We don't know conclusively what's happening there. So it's perilous from a journalistic standpoint to rush to conclusions. We already have several prominent examples of stories out of Ukraine which the media blasted everywhere and demanded that we believe, but were then proven totally false. Ukrainian soldiers on Snake Island, for instance, who all died valiantly fighting the Russians. But then they actually didn't die and were all alive and just surrendered. Or the famous Ghost of Kiev, the heroic Ukrainian fighter pilot who shot down half a dozen Russian MiGs defending Ukraine. Except actually he doesn't exist, and the footage was just from a video game. Even Zelensky's famous quote, "I need ammo, not a ride," is questionable at best. Despite being cited by hundreds of articles, the only evidence Zelensky said that is one unnamed U.S. official. Not even Zelensky's office will confirm that he said it. Yet again, the media all insisted that we believe these stories as fact until they turned out not to be fact. It's the same story with the hospital in Mariupol. There are numerous reports that the hospital was actually abandoned, that there were no patients inside. That's because, and this is according to locals and even hospital staff, the hospital was actually cleared out weeks ago and was being used as a base of operations for the Ukrainian military. In fact, the son of a hospital employee said at the end of February, the Ukrainian military dispersed the hospital staff and set up firing points inside the building. A point which Russia's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov repeated when grilled by an uppity journalist from CNBC.
Regarding the maternity hospital, this is not the first time we have seen pathetic outcries concerning so-called atrocities by the Russian armed forces. On the 7th March, 3 days ago, or the 6th or 7th, I don't remember exactly, at the UN Security Council, our delegation presented facts that this maternity hospital had long since been captured by the Azov battalion and other radical factions, from where all expectant mothers, all nurses, and all personnel had been kicked out. This was a base of the ultra-radical Azov battalion. These facts were presented 3 days ago, so you can make your own conclusions about the methods used to manipulate public opinion across the world.
We're not saying we know what happened there or that this was a false flag, but if you can get off the carousel of inflammatory propaganda for just one moment, you have to admit that this does sound awfully familiar and seems to fit a pattern that we've all seen many times before. Think, just think. Try thinking for yourself instead of thinking whatever you're told to think by people and organizations whose only legacy is obfuscation and deception. Perhaps war crimes are being committed. Perhaps civilians are being murdered, but perhaps they aren't. So before you rush to conclusions and believe whatever the TV and social media tells you, think. For One American News, I'm Pearson Sharp.
I have this screenshot that someone sent me of the way the people on the left were talking about the Ukraine situation before the war. I'm gonna send this to you, Jamie. Sorry, but this is one of the things that's so weird is that they were very disparaging of Ukraine, and they were talking about the massive corruption of Ukraine and how horrible it was over there. Mm-hmm. And now all of a sudden they're looking at it like they're heroes.
Yeah, I mean
that's the same exact people.
Yeah,
this is what's confusing. This is how the West was covering Ukraine before the wars. Welcome to Ukraine, the most corrupt nation in Europe. That's Fox. A new Europe. Ukrainian president rule becomes increasingly corrupt and authoritarian. Ukrainian President Zelensky deepens alliance with the far right. And this is one of the things that we're hearing from people on both sides, that they have a Nazi problem over there, that there's a lot of Nazis involved in Ukraine. And there was something that I saw on Facebook where Facebook allowed, I don't know who this is what's so confusing about, what they call the fog of war. It's not necessarily really the fog of war, it's the fog of the distribution of information. Is that we're supposed to just completely take a hard right turn or a veer away, a hard angle away from the narrative that was being pushed just a couple of years ago. Yeah. And we're supposed to ignore all this stuff now. And I don't know what's right and what's wrong. Because there was something about Facebook allowing likes. Yeah, Facebook allows war posts urging violence against Russian invaders. Like, what?
Yeah, I know.
What the
saw that.
fuck is that?
Yeah.
Like, what is that?